Welcome to the Living Well Church podcast, and thanks for tuning in today. Our mission as a church is to help people find faith in Jesus and a life of purpose and hope. You're about to watch a message that will challenge you, inspire you, encourage you, and most of all, point you to Jesus and the life of purpose and hope He has planned for you. So lean in and enjoy, and let God speak into your life.
This morning we're continuing our series on wellness, on living well, and we're going to be looking at the physical side of that. And those of you that have been here for a couple of years, you might remember a few years ago Marcus preached on our souls, and he walked down to preach his sermon to the soundtrack of Soul Man. And I wondered this morning whether I could maybe walk down to Olivia Newton-John's Let's Get Physical. But I thought it might be a little bit close to the bone, maybe. So I went away from that, which I think is a sign of maturity in me, which is good. But there's been a real sense of God's presence here this morning, and I want us to stay in that as we look at this topic, because I'm going to preach on something quite specific this morning. And my worry was that it's something that some of us might immediately switch off from as soon as I mention it. And what I really believe is that everything that's written in the Bible, everything that teaches us from the Bible, is something that is there for all of us. It's not just for a select few. So what I want to preach on this morning, and I'm hoping in a few weeks' time I'll get the chance to broaden out this wellness subject, because I think both in emotional and relational, which we've had so far, we've all felt as preachers that these are really broad topics to speak on in just one session. So hopefully I will get the chance to broaden it out. But what I really wanted to speak on this morning is something that I don't think I've ever heard spoken on before in church. And when it comes to our physical bodies, I've heard sermons on a number of subjects, and I think we as a church, not just here, but universally, are very good at talking about a few particular subjects under this banner. So we talk about things like healing a lot, healing and sickness. We talk about things, I've every now and again heard somebody talk about gluttony, as part of their sermon. What we like to talk about things that we should abstain from. So, I've heard many sermons on drugs, on excessive alcohol consumption, on the wrong types of sexual relationships that we should avoid, all that kind of stuff. But I don't think I've ever heard a sermon before on the biblical perspective of exercise and of living an active lifestyle, and of our responsibility to maybe look after our bodies. So please don't switch off. Now, if you think immediately, this is not for me, please don't switch off, because I really think, and I feel like God's Spirit is here this morning and is speaking to all of us. So a few weeks ago, I was lucky enough to stand at the top of the three highest mountains in the UK, and I was just blown away by the amazing capacity of God's creation. How incredible some of the things that God has made is. And I think that we're often impressed by things like that as human beings. We see things of scale that just make us look so tiny, and we think, wow, God, you are amazing. What you can do is incredible. But what I really wonder is, do we ever think of ourselves? Do we ever think of the human body and the way that God has stitched us together as being equally incredible as that? And this isn't about looking in the mirror and going, you know what, I am pretty amazing. It isn't that. But it's about actually understanding that there was a huge amount of genius that went in to God's creation of us. And it's an equal amount of genius as any of these amazing things in nature that we so often admire. In Psalm 193, verses 13 to 14, it says, "You created my innermost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I'm fearfully and I'm wonderfully made." And in the original Hebrew text of that verse, this word fearfully is translated as with reverence, or with heartfelt interest, or with great respect. So I think this morning we need to understand that when God stitched us together in our mother's wombs, when He put together the very genetic makeup of the human being, it was with a huge amount of respect and interest that He did that. And He did that in a way that would equip us to live life. And as we're told in John 10, verse 10, not just live life, but live life to its fullness as well. And I think sometimes in church we can adopt this opinion that actually nothing on earth really matters. And there's a degree of truth in that we're taught in the Bible that we should seek first the kingdom of God. So we should seek first eternal things. and we should store up for ourselves eternal inheritance rather than building up an earthly empire for us here. But here's the really important thing. God has called us for a work here. Every single one of us has a ministry on this earth. We're all called to do things in building the kingdom right here. And whether we like it or not, those things involve our body. Our body is a critical part of that process. So if we even subconsciously disregard the importance of our human bodies, then not only are we potentially insulting a God that put us together with the greatest interest and the greatest design, but also we're potentially downplaying the work that he's actually called us to do here on this earth as well. This is an interesting fact for you, and this is a fact that my close family and friends will know that I quote a lot when it comes to physical activity and that sort of stuff. And that's this. The single biggest killer in modern society is inactivity. Regardless of what else you might hear, regardless of what else we as society might make a bigger deal of, the biggest killer is inactivity. And people who are inactive are defined by the American Heart Foundation as those that don't get 30 minutes of aerobic exercise 3 to 4 times a week. And this doesn't have to be anything super excessive. This isn't running a half marathon 3 or 4 times a week. This is even, a brisk walk, a brisk 30-minute walk, 3 or 4 times a week. And there was a study carried out by students at the University of Cambridge in 2015 which showed inactivity is killing twice as many people in Europe as obesity is. And we in society, we like to talk about obesity a lot, and we think of it as this incredibly unhealthy state and this really dangerous state for a human to be in. But actually, what was really interesting about this study was they followed the lives of 334,000 people in Europe across a 12-year period. And across all 3 body classifications of normal weight, of overweight, and of obesity, the single biggest risk of life-limiting disease or death was inactivity across all of them. And actually, they found that people who were classed as obese, who exercised regularly, were at a lower risk of those things than people described as thin who didn't exercise, which is really interesting. And when I first heard that, I was pretty shocked, but actually the more I started to think about it, the more I realized that this isn't that surprising, because God has designed our bodies with the capability to be active. And as with a lot of things, if we don't take responsibility for the gifts that God gives us, then we run the risk of losing those things. And actually, what God has given our bodies the ability to do is pretty incredible as human beings. I'm always inspired when I see, these guys cycling the Tour de France, or these marathon runners, or the Brownlee brothers doing their crazy triathlons. I think it's mind-blowing what our bodies are actually capable of if we discipline them. And I noticed this myself. I ran a marathon a few years ago, and I wasn't terribly unfit when I started training for the marathon. I could probably run 5 miles, maybe 7 miles without totally collapsing. But throughout the course of my training, I started to realize this is incredible what God has actually put in the human body and what the human body can do once you discipline it and once you train it. And I'm not saying in any way that we're all called to run marathons. I'm not saying that. Please don't think that's what I'm saying this morning. But what I am saying is that I think there is a degree of respect that we have to have for the gift, which is our human bodies. And actually, we have to understand that we need to be good stewards of all things that God gives us. And our bodies are an example of that. I just want to read you a passage which is found in Matthew 25, verses 14 to 27, which hopefully will come up on the screen as well. And this is Jesus' parable of the talents. And it says this: "Again, it will be like a man going on a journey, who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. To one he gave 5 bags of gold, to another 2 bags, and to another 1 bag, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. The man who had received 5 bags of gold went at once and put his money to work, and gained 5 bags more. So also the one with 2 bags of gold gained 2 more. But the man who had received 1 bag went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who'd received 5 bags of gold bought the other 5. 'Master,' he said, 'you entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I have gained 5 more.' His master replied, 'Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. The man with 2 bags of gold also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. See, I have gained 2 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. Then the man who had received 1 bag of gold came. Master, he said, I knew that you were a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid, and I went out and I hid your gold in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you. His master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvested when I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed? Well then, you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers, so that when I returned, I would receive it back with interest. You see, as followers of Christ, we're not called to be lazy in anything that we do. And that's pretty clear when we read through the Bible. You know, we're called to be disciplined, and we're called to overcome the cravings of our human flesh. And one of those is laziness. And in the book of Proverbs, we're warned over and over again about being sluggards. So we're warned against this attitude of sluggishness. Also, in Proverbs 20, we're specifically warned against enjoying sleep too much. Sorry for those that like sleep a lot, but we are warned specifically against that in Proverbs 20. In 2 Thessalonians, the Apostle Paul says, if a man doesn't want to work, then he shouldn't eat. So we're called not to be lazy in our work. We're called not to live sluggish lifestyles. We're called not to be lazy with having too much sleep. And here in this parable that Jesus tells, we're called not to be lazy with the things that God gives to us. And again, you might be sitting here this morning and going, you know what, Joe, I'm not a lazy person. I don't consider myself a lazy person, but exercise just isn't my thing. That's just not something that I'm called to. It's not something I enjoy. It's not something I want to spend any time doing. But what I think is really interesting, and what I think is actually quite difficult to argue with, is that God has actually designed our bodies in a way that reinforces and rewards physical activity and an active lifestyle. So I'll give you a few examples. As I mentioned earlier, regular exercise categorically reduces our risk of ending up with life-limiting or life-ending diseases. And there's a whole host of them, things like diabetes, heart disease, some forms of cancer, high blood pressure, cholesterol, and loads of others. So God has designed our bodies in an earthly sense to endure. And actually, by living healthy and active lifestyles, we dramatically reduce the chance of ending up with those kind of illnesses. Now, I'm not saying that if you're here this morning and you are suffering with any of those or any other illness, that is your fault because you didn't exercise enough. I'm categorically not saying that. And even the fittest of us fall victim to disease and to illness at times because of the fallen state of this world. But it does dramatically reduce the chances of those things happening. Secondly, it's an undeniable fact that when we exercise, when we put our body through physical exertion, our muscles get stronger, our cardiovascular system becomes way more effective, so the way that blood moves around our body is far more efficient. And also, unhealthy levels of fat in our body are decreased. So, to sum that up, our body basically becomes better at dealing with life if we live an active lifestyle and if we exercise regularly. And thirdly, and for me this is the most interesting one, God has clearly designed our brains in a way that endorse exercise and endorse physical activity. Because science proves that when we do put our body into active situations like that, endorphins are released. And endorphins are a compound or a chemical that's produced in the pituitary gland at the base of the brain. And during exercise, they are released, and they're often referred to as naturally occurring pain relievers that leave the body feeling soothed and leave the body feeling good. And they have a whole host of really amazing benefits to our body. And just to give you a few examples, they are scientifically proven to dramatically reduce stress levels, to improve self-esteem, to ward off anxiety, to massively improve our quality of sleep, to increase energy levels every day by up to 20%, so a fifth more energy every day. And again, many other things. And this is amazing. And what doctors actually claim that is, somebody who exercises 3 to 5 times a week, that activity is proven to be as effective as antidepressant medication for people that are struggling with moderate to mild depression. That's amazing, isn't it? And that blows my mind. And I don't want to open up a totally different can of worms this morning, but it genuinely terrifies me that in our modern society, so many of our young people, and especially so many of our young girls, I think, today, are struggling with forms of depression and forms of anxiety, and are struggling to the extent where they are taking medication to help them deal with these negative emotions that they're going through. In another study that was conducted in July last year, it was found that the number of people in the UK that are now prescribed antidepressants has over doubled in the last decade. And this really struck me. Another study showing between the years of 2005 and 2012, the number of children in our society that are being prescribed antidepressant medication has gone up by 54%. 54% more of our children are in a place of depression now and are on medication for it. And look, I'm not judging anybody that is in that place. Some people very close to my heart battle with some of these things, but that cannot be right. And that cannot be God's best desire and best design for our lives, especially when there is a solution in our very bodies, in part of his original design and his original makeup of our DNA, that actually battles this stuff for us if we allow ourselves to live an active lifestyle. And that even a huge amount of depression sufferers might not have to use medication if they lived an active lifestyle. So I really believe that the endorphins that our brain create are a part of God's design for us. I believe they're a gift from God to us that enables us to experience his joy and to experience his peace. And you might say to me, well, that's all well and good, Joe, but actually I don't want to live a life that's just aimed at me living the best life and me having the best time and me feeling joy and me feeling peace. Instead of exercising, I could be using that time to help other people. I could be making other people's lives better. I'm called to love my neighbor. I'm called to show God's love to other people. And I totally agree with that. And I'd really admire your heart if that's the way you feel this morning. But I would counter that mindset with this question. If you've got 20% more energy every day, if you sleep better, if your body's stronger, if you feel better about yourself, your self-esteem is higher, which makes you more acutely aware of God's goodness, of God's joy, and his desires for you, does that put you in a better or a worse place to serve other people? Because I think I know where it puts me. And as some of you will know, I do like to exercise regularly, and I really do see the benefits in my energy levels on a weekly basis. Now, I work in the recruitment industry, and historically in this industry, there was a massive cocaine culture. And it's something that I've seen a little bit during my career. Not that something I've ever partaken in, by the way, but I've seen it in my career a little bit. And the reason is that what we do is notoriously stressful at times. Because ultimately, we kind of work in a sales role, but instead of selling a product or a thing, we are involved with people who have their own decision-making capabilities and can change their mind at any minute and can mean that months and months of work goes out the window. So notoriously, it's a stressful industry. And historically, lots of people dealt with that with cocaine because it meant that cocaine gave their mind and their body a short-term boost. And that enabled them to work longer hours and to go through the pain barrier more during their working careers. And I can kind of empathize with that, but not with cocaine, but with exercise. And that has actually become my antidote over the years. When I've worked incredibly long hours throughout the week, and I've still had other things to fit into my week, I've found that by exercising regularly, I've noticed a tangible difference in my energy levels. And even now, when I have a particularly manic week and I haven't managed to fit in the kind of exercise that I would normally fit into a week, I do feel more sluggish. And I feel like I have less energy when I get home from work to do the other things that I need to do. Whether that is pray for that person or meet up with that person or prepare that sermon or whatever it is that I might be doing, I honestly feel much, much better and much more alive and with much more energy when I have done that. And I want to caveat what I'm saying here with the fact that I know I am fortunate in that I enjoy exercising. And for me, it's something that I would choose to spend my time doing, anyway. So I get that is easier for me than for people who might be sat here and it's their worst nightmare. And yeah, there is that attitude, I think, sometimes of exercise just isn't for me. It isn't my thing. And I do get that. You know, I've got close friends that would say going out for a run or going out for a cycle or whatever it is quite possibly the worst thing they could imagine doing with their free time. And I get that. But actually, I want to challenge that attitude a little bit this morning. Because, you know, I mentioned earlier on that I ran a marathon a few years ago, but I used to hate running. I literally used to hate just going for a run. It was mind-numbingly boring for me. I've always enjoyed sport, and when I was younger, I used to play a lot of sport, play a lot of football, rugby, basketball. So I naturally was exercising without really thinking about it, because they were hobbies for me. But that changed when I moved to London and I started working in London. I didn't have a network, I didn't know anybody, I didn't have any teams that I was part of. I also had much less time because I started working a proper job then. And I just didn't have time to fit in that stuff in my week like I used to be able to do. So for me, I started running as a necessity, really, because I knew that my body needed to exercise and I knew that I would feel sluggish and I'd have low energy and all that kind of stuff if I didn't. So it was just something that I could fit into my day. And at the beginning, I absolutely hated it. I dreaded just going out for a run, and you know, every mile felt like 5 miles because it is really boring, isn't it? But I did it because it fits into my lifestyle and did at that time. And there's someone else in the congregation that I just want to use as a case study for this, and I have asked her permission, so she is prepared, but I wanted to just tell you about something that Lucy Van Dyke has been doing over the last 12 months or so. And by Lucy's own admission, 12 months ago, she couldn't run around the block. And that's not me saying that, that's Lucy saying that. And she decided, because she wanted to keep up with her kids and she was feeling that lack of energy, that she was going to run a 5K. And so she signed up for this program, which is a government initiative called Couch to 5K. And as a slight aside, when you go onto the NHS website, this Couch to 5K program is under their Living Well tab. I kid you not, that is a fact. And at the very beginning, this just involved 60 seconds of running, followed by 90 seconds of walking. That's how basic it was at the beginning. And I remember Lucy telling me that she even found that difficult in the early days. You know, 60 seconds of running, 90 seconds of walking to recover. And gradually you build it up and you build it up. And in the early days, it wasn't pleasant, was it, Lucy? The red, sweaty face would come out. You know, the stitch would hit her after 5 minutes, and it was not a pleasant thing. It wasn't something she enjoyed doing. It wasn't something she naturally felt called to do with her spare time. But she knew that there were benefits for her if she stuck to it. And what's amazing about Lucy is that now, 12 months on, she's running like 10 miles and enjoying it. And it's now something that in her day she actually looks forward to. It's one of the highlights of her day, and she feels way better as a result. She's got more energy, and frankly, is a real inspiration to me on the days when I just can't be bothered to go out for a run or whatever. So, you know, my point here is that you might not feel like exercise is something that you desperately want to do with your time, but actually, there are ways to get it into your lifestyle, and it might not be running. You know, running isn't for everybody. It might be walking. You know, trust me, when you've walked up 3 mountains in 24 hours, you feel pretty tired, and it's pretty good for you. So walking is something that is great for the body. It might be just taking your kids swimming. It might be going to the park and running around with them for half an hour. You know, it doesn't have to be something super intense and super structured, but actually, you know, the stats show that if we can do that, even just 3 times a week, we will massively benefit on a number of levels. So look, I'm sure you're getting the point now. You know, I've been banging this drum since I got up here. But you know, I believe our bodies are designed in a way that was designed to be active and designed to move vigorously. And I believe that was God's intention for us. But that said, you know, like with anything else on this earth, we have to make sure that things don't take over our lives as well. And, you know, as with a number of other things, we have to make sure that exercise doesn't become the thing that we build our lives on. And, you know, I know lots of people that don't give exercise the respect that it probably deserves in their life, but I equally know a lot of people who have made it their lives. And actually, you know, working out and getting to the gym and pursuing that perfect body and eating those tiny amount of calories and all that stuff has actually become a bit of an idol for them. It's become the thing they get out of bed for in the morning. And, you know, we've got to be really careful of this. You know, if exercising stops you coming to church, then that's not right. If exercising doesn't leave you with enough time in the week to spend time with God, then that's not right. And if if you are exercising with the motivation of wanting to impress other people with how you look, then that also isn't right. And that isn't an attitude that God endorses. In Jeremiah 9, verses 23 to 24, it says, "Let not the wise boast of their wisdom, or the strong boast of their strength, or the rich boast of their riches, but let the one who boasts boast about this, that they have the understanding to know me." So exercise shouldn't be something that becomes pride-filled. But actually, if we can find a way just to get it into our lives, then it can be a really wonderful, God-filled addition to our lives with a whole host of benefits. And it should be approached with a heart that wants to be disciplined, and a heart that wants to fight maybe an attitude of laziness, but also a heart that says, "I want to better serve you, God." And ultimately, our bodies are our tool with which we can serve on this earth. And there's no way of getting around that. We're all called to a ministry. And I'll finish with this. We're all called to a ministry. We're all called to serve on this earth. And regardless of what area that might be in, it involves our body as well as our spirits. And just like with our spirits, if our bodies are a tool for service of God, then surely we should want them to be as effective and as sharp a tool as possible. And so I guess I'd end with this question, which is my body, honestly, today, a help or a hindrance to my ministry? Does it enhance my ministry, or does it maybe make that ministry slightly tougher to go about day by day? And I just leave you with these three things to remember. First of all, we are fearfully and we are wonderfully made and created with the utmost interest and the greatest respect by God. And there is a genius in the way that he has put our bodies together. Secondly, as Christians, we're not called to be sluggish. We're not called to adopt a lazy attitude in anything that we do. And that includes building God's kingdom. And thirdly, our bodies are an awesome gift. They're an amazing gift, and they are a vital tool in the service that we can do on this earth to God. So, as Jesus teaches in the parable of the talents, let's respect them. Let's give that gift that he has given to us the right level of respect that it deserves. And let's invest in them so that he can make us as productive as possible while we serve him on this earth. Thank you.